Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It is an honor. As I look at the program and the speakers, it looks like an exciting and informative conference. Again, my name is Charlie Johnson. I'm from Madison, South Dakota. Our family has been farming organically, now coming up upon our 50th year. We started in 1976. My late father, Bertie Johnson, along with my uncle, William Johnson, started the operation to transition to organic at that time. My late father had a way of saying of how he was going to treat his land, especially at the start of that transition. And it involved that he was not going to allow any product or any material to come onto his farm that he first couldn't put onto the tip of his tongue without it killing him first. And so that was the connection that he made with organic farming going way back then. So Rhoda is handing out just a sheet, and it's not really even an outline, but it kind of covers the basics of what we're going to cover today, soil, steward, and community. Or as I have it on there, I guess I forgot the word steward and I said farmer, but either way. So we're going to kind of discuss that trifecta, if we could. And then we'll kind of go back and we'll talk about some of the practices that we use on Johnson Farms or at Johnson Farms. But first of all, to kind of get a better idea of what we have here in the room, how many of you are what I would say active producers, whether it be livestock or crops or any? Okay. Okay. How many of them raise field crops?
Yeah, great.
Have or are? Okay. Okay, good. I want to start here with a poem that I wrote. And this goes back too many years ago, so I'm not going to tell you how many years. But it's entitled Our Land. Breathing the love of the land, we live a life of friendship in harmony with God, His creation, and all of mankind. The tilling of the land is the cultivation of God's love, a realization of faith in action. The sweat of today is a dew of tomorrow's sunrise, a reservoir of love. The toil of hard work is a sacrifice of commitment, living the gospel of the Lord. Caring for the life in the land is a concern for the needs of others, a consideration of our own Christianity. The harvest from the land is the reward of good work, a blessing of one's belief. We respect one another, for God makes no greater demand. We respect the land, for it makes no other demand. And so that's been kind of the model, the oath, the parable that we have lived with at Johnson Farms. I think it's important as we describe what a steward is. We need that part as we make that transition to organic or be part of an organic operation. It depends upon the steward of the land in your philosophy and your relationship with the land. Next comes the soil itself. And I think I'm probably speaking to the choir here today, but soil is not just black dirt. It's a community. It's a life organism. It's made up of so many different life forms that we have to treat it as a community. And, we wouldn't imagine taking the town of Madison, where I'm from, and we're just going to aerial bomb it with pesticides and expect that we're going to have anything good that comes out of it. And would we expect anything different if we did that to our own land and to our soil and to our crops? by carpet bombing the life in the soil there. So that life needs to be nurtured. It needs water and food and air just like we do. And so we need to treat our farming practices in that manner, that we are nurturing life in the soil and in the community. The third component of, I say, getting into organic is community. And I take that kind of broadly. We need to have a community, whether it's your local community or the agriculture community or the commodity community, the political community, the religious community, has to understand and respect and give reverence to that effort. I've made this comment quite a bit through my life recently, but we could either have students or high school kids in our schools, or we could have Monsanto in our fields, but we can't have both. And I think you understand where I'm coming from. We can't have Monsanto and the technology that goes with it, or ever the involving technology of chemical uses. And what that's doing is just basically taking the farmer out of farming. And so we have to come back to that realization that if we really want to populate our rural countryside again, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of being certified organic, but if we really want to have the population base back in our rural countryside and our small communities, we need to have people back there. And we have to have them as being a viable role on that land. And there's no better way than farming without chemicals to get you back involved in having a real specific role on the farm. Otherwise, we could just let technology depopulate this countryside in our state. And what does that bring us to? A hierarchy and a concentration of wealth. And we're seeing it already. There's no reason why land has to be going for $10,000, $15,000 an acre, or cash rents that are bumping people out of agriculture. And we don't need farm programs that basically are subsidizing those kind of efforts. And I'm proud to call myself a progressive liberal Democrat, but we didn't need to be spending $30 billion at Christmas time to give to the agriculture community just because they had a bum year of low crop prices. And so, we need to make our farm programs and our perspective in our farming roles to respect the people that come on to agriculture. Family farming, I view it as being defined as three things. There's three components within an economic system. There's labor, there's management, and there's ownership or capital. And in family farming, it involves all three of those components as being part of the one. It's not one of the three, it's not two of the three, it is all three. So a viable family farm system is where that same family or that same type of family agriculture is involving labor, management, and capital ownership all together. There's not that segregation that you find on the larger farms. And a little more here when we get into my talk about the farming methods. You're going to find out today that diversity is not a dirty word, okay? As we're finding out today in the political circles. It's an essential word, very essential. So anyhow, at this point, does anybody have any comments or questions at all? Everybody's smiling too. Okay. So going back to our farm, as I mentioned earlier, we've been organic since 1976. And I want to share with you this is back in 1976. This is a year of corn that my father took out of a neighboring field that had the full chemical program. And it pretty much turned this way almost within 2 or 3 years. He then took a year of corn out of a field that he never had allowed any chemicals to be on that land. It wasn't necessarily certified organic, but here's a year of corn now 50 years later that still is preserved and still yellow. So I guess the question is, where do we want our food supply to come from? A field that doesn't have chemical use on it? Or would we rather have food coming from this type of production? So that was the emphasis that really drove my father home to say we have to go to be an organic. My dad unfortunately suffered a disabling stroke in 1981. I had an option to go to law school at USDA in Vermilion. I had a younger sibling that was just starting VOTEC school in Watertown. I had 2 siblings that were ages 2 and 10 still at home, and we took over the farm, my brother and I, at that point. And so we continued the mission of what my father had started to be organic farmers. And we were at 560 acres then, cow-calf operation, still raising hogs. And today now we are at 2,600 acres. We involve now another brother, Kevin, who's actually 23 years younger than I am. He was that 2-year-old back when we started farming. And then my son, Jordan. So it's a 4-way partnership. We all have responsibilities, and we share the expenses and the income 4 ways. We raise 4 major crops: corn, oats, soybeans, alfalfa, and we do so in a 6-year rotation. And before I tell you what the rotation is, I'd like to share with you what I call the essentials of a good crop rotation. First of all, you have to consider a warm season crop versus having a cool season crop in your rotation. I think most people here probably know what I mean by a warm season crop versus a cool season. A row crop versus a smother crop or a smother crop, okay? An annual versus a perennial. And a legume versus a grass crop. Now there's some other dynamics and metrics you could probably come up with beyond just these 4, but it's good to lay out those type of metrics and then take any crop rotation that you're considering and put that against these metrics. So with our rotation, it's pretty much a strict 6-year rotation, and we're going to go by the day of the week, okay? And so we have about 1,600 acres, which is in tillable ground. We divide those 1,600 acres into pretty much 6 equal portions for an organic basis. And so on Monday, we start with oats. It's a grain crop. And can you tell me, it's a cool season, right? It's a grass. It's an annual, right? So we get that component of the metrics. But we also sow alfalfa with it. So oats serves both as a grain crop and as a cover crop for the upcoming alfalfa. On Tuesday, we're into alfalfa hay. And alfalfa is now a legume, perennial, a smother crop. Okay? So then we go to Wednesday, and we keep the alfalfa in just for 2 years. So it's 2 days out of the week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Okay? And so, again, alfalfa. But then before we get to Thursday, we convert the ground and we go to soybeans. Okay? Now, soybeans is a row crop, right? Warm season, but a legume. Okay? So we've hit that component. After the soybean harvest, we apply winter rye as a cover crop. And then that cover crop or green manure crop serves as fertilizer as we go into corn on Friday. Okay? So on Friday, we're growing corn. And corn is a grass, warm season, row crop. Okay? And then finally we get to Saturday and we go back to soybeans one last time. So you see with our rotation, we've got 2/3 of the time we're into legume, with the alfalfa and the soybeans. 1/3 of the time we're into grasses, which is either the corn or the oats. Half of the time we're into row crop. Half of the time we're into smother or cover crop. Okay? And we like that aspect too when we're doing half row crop and half smother crop. We've got some ground, like a lot of areas in South Dakota, that can be hilly or prone to erosion. So rather than having one 80 or 160 acre field, we will divide that field into two, and we always will have an upper portion into row crop and the side hill or the lower portion into cover crop, which is the alfalfa or the oats. And then when it's time for the oats and the alfalfa to be switched to row crop, the upper land is getting converted to cover crop or smother crop. So it serves as an erosion factor too for us. The other thing that we like with our crop rotation, it gives us multiple crops. We let that drive, our agronomy drive our rotation, and we don't be chasing prices here and there. And we don't think, well, this year we're going to grow more soybeans, or we're going to grow more oats, or we're going to grow more corn. We stick pretty much to our rotation, and we don't let crop prices chase us around. On our farm, we market through NFO Organic. We let a bargaining agent who not only works for our farm, but also works in a collective marketing situation to represent production from all the farms across the country. And it allows us to make sure that we have proceeds that are protected. There's weeks where we may have 4 or 5 or 6 semi-loads of grain leaving the farm, and that could be in the neighborhood of anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000. And it's nice that you have an organization representing your marketing so that you can sleep a little better at night and not having that kind of dollars sitting out. The other thing that I always recommend too with anybody going to organic farming is to have multiple medium-sized bin storage. Because if you get into organic grain farming, you're going to be the warehouse, the storage unit for all of your production, not just part of it. Because the end user or the buyer is going to depend on you providing the storage for that production so that when they're ready, that they can procure that product and bring it into their end use. So don't be putting up 1 or 2 100,000 bushel beds. Get maybe a dozen or so smaller beds. Okay, so. Well, does anybody have any specific questions? I mean, yes, Rhoda.
And then a local or how are you terminating or alpha?
We're terminating it with a chisel plowing in the fall. There is organic farmers out there that are attempting to do a lot less tillage. It's hard to say. I do think that the fact that we have at least a half of our years in production where we're not doing any tillage at all, and I'm talking about the oats and the alfalfa, that we're not doing the intensity of tillage. With row crops, I always recommend planting late. Somebody says, well, how do you do weed control in organic? And my best advice is make sure you take a fishing trip in May, So don't get caught up because with today's herbicides and seed technology, you've got a lot of producers, if the weather's halfway open in April, they're going to be planting all their beans and corn in April already in the state of South Dakota. And you've definitely got to stay away from that. So some of the best bean crops that I've had through our career, they've been planted in the first part of June. And I'm really tempted not to plant corn until at least past Mother's Day weekend. So you got to get past that last cold week, that last 35, 40 degree mornings, make sure that soil temperature is up at a viable level. We like to plant in warm, moist soils. Because our first tool of going organic is we're going to harrow blind. Usually we're going to be harrowing fields 2 or 3 days after planting before there's any. But we like to see emergence and rolling up within 5 to 6 days after beans and corn are planted, because then we're doing our rotary hoeing. If you've got seed that's sitting in the ground for 10, 12, 14 days and not emerging, the grasses and weeds are going to be ahead of the crop, and then you've got problems. So weed control starts even before you take the bag out of the shed and get to the planter. You've got to be doing a little thinking. So don't be too alarmed if the neighbors are greasing up the planter and washing it off and putting it back in the shed. You haven't even started yet. You gotta be patient. The other thing that helps too with our rotation, since we're not all just corn or beans or all just corn, with our rotation of oats and alfalfa, we have a half of our acres already planted before anybody does any tillage or farm work, and so I like to think we're ahead of the game that way anyhow. So the other thing I recommend too with organic farming, keep a livestock component in conjunction with the operation. As my brother likes to say, the cows are there to eat your mistakes. And they're also a good source of fertility. We do pile up our manure, especially from our winter months where we may have more of a feedlot situation where we winter feed them. And then after fall harvest, we will take that cattle manure and we will load it onto the manure spreaders, but we will not take it directly to the field. We will line it up in what we call furrows. We just spread it out like a big long Tootsie Roll. And it's not necessarily composted, but at least it heats it up, breaks up that large chunks of manure. And then we come back a few weeks later, and I was hauling cattle manure up until the week past Christmas this year because that manure is heated up in the pile, and you can load it up, put it right on the manure spreader, and take it out. And so that's a major source of our fertility on our farm. So is the large amount of alfalfa that we grow on the farm. Our cows eat quite well. We have a 180 head cow-calf operation. The other thing that we are starting to do more and more recently, and it's been helped with a CSP contract that we have with NRCS Conservation Program, is rather than cutting and baling the alfalfa, we just take a stalk chopper and we just mulch it right back onto the ground. Now, that may seem kind of foolish to take good forage and just let it go back to the ground. But again, that goes back to my idea what soil is. It's a community. It needs food. And so our premise is we may not be feeding the cows the alfalfa, but we're feeding the cows in the soil. And so we're giving them food. And hopefully we'll get our investment back through better soil fertility by mulching the alfalfa. So, any other questions? Yeah, Bob.
Charlie, I spend a lot of time in the financial trying to make sure people know that business is a business where revenue exceeds
Right.
expense. The fact that you've been in business now for over 50 years
Right.
is testament to, first of all, that you are profitable, but you are also sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
You are to that point where it's not only you, but it's your other family.
Right. Right.
I think that's concurrent with market development and a lot of production as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain about some of that concurrent market development? You need to dump whacker, produce it, expect somebody's going to buy it. You have to actively work on it, right?
Well, one major thing that I saw, I hope this kind of partly answers your question. Back in the 90s, there was quite a concern about the hormone and dairy cattle, the BGH. And we weren't really selling a whole lot of what I call feed grains into an organic market. We were still running a lot of that corn through our conventional hog operation. But you really saw, I think, the consumer demand for organic dairy take off at that point, because where else were you going to get a dairy product that didn't have the growth hormone in it? And so I really saw that taking off as a viable market for us. And you saw a lot of our grain at that time going into the Mississippi River Valley area. The real hotbed of organic, and even today, is in that southwest Wisconsin, southeast Minnesota, northeast Iowa, northern Illinois. And the topography there is very hilly, but it lends to a lot of what I call just neat organic dairy operations that are maybe 20 to 40 head in size. And they're concentrating on the grass and the pasture and the cows. And they're letting some fool like me out in middle South Dakota raise the corn and the beans for them, So that helps. The other thing that I've seen quite a bit lately is the organic poultry, whether it be in meat or eggs, has really taken off too. So that's provided a market for us. But I'll tell you the truth, you kind of do some soul searching when you first get started. And even though I'm sure what makes up profitability on our farm is some of those organic premiums, but if it really comes down to it, if there wasn't a cent of premium, we'd still do the way we do it. That's the real internal commitment to it. And again, the diversity helps. You've got the cattle. Even admittedly today now, grain prices, even for organic grains, aren't all that hot. I mean, there's still a bump up in margin compared to what you can get at your local elevator. But having some cattle sales these last 18 months has been a saving bless too. You know, to have that cow-calf herd and being able to sell some cattle has been a great help. The other thing that we do on our farm, and it's not necessarily a money-making enterprise, but and this is just for my farm, is we have 65 laying hens, you know, and I do it as more of a social event because every time I go to town, I've got 2 or 3 friends or parties that, you know, 4 or 5 dozen you leave off at their office, and they lay the cash on the desk, and, you know, and I keep my eggs at a Democratic $3 a dozen rather than the Trump $6 a dozen. So I just, so anyhow, and the other thing that we do to connect with consumers directly is we do keep some of our beef back, and we do feed them out during the winter months. We keep a closed herd, so we keep our own replacements out of the heifers, but we take about 20 heifers and we feed them out. We don't necessarily sell them as organic certified, but people love our beef, and they get quarters or halves. I don't sell retail cuts, but it's a way of connecting with that consumer directly. Otherwise, you know, most of our grains go out on semis, and they go out of state, and so you don't really have that, what I call direct connection. That I know that a lot of you as specialty producers, I think that's a marvel of your business is you've got one hand doing the production or the growing, and very directly right next to you, you're doing the sales. And yeah, you miss out on a little bit of that when you're just an organic grain farmer. But so. I don't know if that answers your question at all, boss.
What would you say? You said you kind of ignore the market forces. What would you say is the most profitable rotation? And you got with the cure rotation part.
Right.
Which one generally provides?
Well, admittedly, it's probably still the corn and the beans. But I also look at the other crops as being part of a good volleyball team. You know, a good volleyball team doesn't just hit it back over the net necessarily right on the first punch. You know, they might set it up for somebody that can do the spike. And so I like to see that the oats and the alfalfa in our rotation set it up that we can get those respectable yields in the corn and the beans, so that we do market those grains for a good price, that it does help cover for those years when the other acres are not necessarily a great revenue producer. When we budget our farm every year, we look at that as a system and not necessarily a specific enterprise. So, you know, again, I come back to that key word, diversity. You really got to focus on that. And yes, Rhoda?
Dude, after 40-some years of farming, have there been some things that you tried that just did not work out the way you thought they would? And things that should have just been avoided?
Yeah. You know, every year there seems to be a little bit of a bump on the road. And so I think when you start getting too confident, there's always something that'll come up to humble you the very next year. And but we've become real comfortable with our rotation program, and I really don't foresee us changing that much at all. And, you know, I lay that out today, and I don't say that in a sense that, okay, this is what you got to do. if I am John Smith going to change to organic and I'm going to take 1,000 acres and I'm going to go to organic tomorrow. No, don't follow my rotation. Follow your own hunch is what I would say. Because you've got to be comfortable within your own farming clothes to do what you're going to do. And just go back to that metrics that I laid out about the warm season and the cool season. You know, if you can check all those boxes through the length of your rotation, at least you've got a good start putting together your rotation. And, you know, when you do become certified organic, and you're going to know more about that from people like Angela Jackson, who's been in that world for so many years. But, you know, one thing they're going to ask of your operation is what type of a soil building program do you have? I mean, you just can't mark a box and say, well, I'm going to be organic or I'm not going to use chemicals next year. No, they're going to ask and really want to know what is your program to build your soil and to do weed control and to do this. So people ask me about pests and diseases and even some losses to weeds. And I kind of come back to that principle that when you plant a seed, it is one that actually becomes thousands in a yield. You know, there's a miracle of what I call just plant growth. And if you've got to lose a certain amount of bushels to a pest situation or a disease situation, it's kind of like tithing in church. You know, be ready to give up 5 or 10% if that's what it takes. But don't burn the church down, okay? Okay? And so, you know, take a little bit of humility with giving. But, you know, I think a lot of what we have today, we have the luxury of, compared to when my dad was farming, we've got environmentally controlled cabs, we got great hydraulics, we got great equipment, and there's more and more farming tools out there that you can use or explore, like flamers. I don't necessarily believe in or use flamers, but a lot of organic grain farmers will use a flamer. There's even been some technology around lasers. You know, don't be afraid to experiment with them. One of the major tools that we use in our farm is a rotary hoe. I think most people here probably know what that is. I hope you do, but I kind of liken a rotary hoe to Chicago politics. Use it early and use it often. You know, vote early, vote often. So, you know, if you're going to wait for a weed to emerge or your field turn a glossy green with weeds, you're too far beyond the ball game at that point. So, we've learned with alfalfa that it really helps with our perennial weed pressures, especially on thistles. You know, I can say that we probably don't have really a thistle issue anymore on our farm. And so, some challenges. Spray drift is a big one. Yeah, it really is. And to be somewhat humorous, I almost wish we were going back to the Roundup drift issues, because now we got the sprays that's more about the plume or the widespread drift. And you know, if you got situations where it'll hang into a neighboring field and it'll drift for miles the next day. So it was easier to deal with an insurance company or a neighbor when you could show that he was spraying, and then a 3 or 4 acre section of your field was harmed. But we've really had, I think, several years now where some of our soybeans have been off production, not the yield that I would like to see. I attribute a lot of it to, I'd say, the last 4 or 5 years of being extremely dry during the months of August and early September. But I'm also wondering if a lot of it isn't the herbicide drift that's occurring in midsummer of some of these applications that are going on. So, and it's difficult. Yes.
How are you combating that threat? Are you having any that story of the big rolling watching?
Well, the biggest thing that we have, I also didn't mention my cousin Aaron also farms 700 acres organically with us. So I would say that, well, in fact, I know all of his fields border up to ours. So he's kind of got that problem solved for him. We're still exposed on some acres, but it helps that we've got a lot of our ground in a contiguous situation. But where we don't, I call it more of an aesthetic approach to getting certified. We keep a 30-foot pass or buffer next to the fence line, and we go about it that way. You know, again, I don't see the issue being so much with the Roundup technology anymore. It's the newer technology we have. And, you know, I hope there's not a certifier in the room, but, you know, I got to wonder if I would be really legitimately certified today if I was to speak up about every hunch that I have. You know, it's tough. And so they say this technology is perfect, but I say that it's not, because if it's perfect, you'd be able to keep it on your side of the fence. And they don't. So one little humorous situation goes back about, I think 7-8 years ago. We farmed some land up by Lake Herman, and it's just a 7-acre field. The next field over, which ironically we farm today, now we rent that field, but the custom operation out of Madison didn't quite go far enough down the road, and they pulled into our 7-acre field and didn't do the 13-acre field that was supposed to be done to the south of there. And of course, when about the time the operator got done, he knew that he had made a mistake. For one thing, he knew he was supposed to spray a 13-acre field, and he had 7 acres on his monitor. And so he calls back to the shop, and he goes, "Well, at least they're going to be happy they got a free spray job." The manager of the co-op said, "No, they're not going to be very happy." So, but you know, sometimes you do have to take it for what it's worth. But yeah, it's a challenge, and it goes back to what I've seen now with these cash rents, and land prices. You know, to really talking about bringing more people into production agriculture, and I'm not necessarily talking about organic grains. I'm talking about anything you want to get into today. It's having access to land. And I think that your specialty board directors deals with that issue. How do aspiring producers find access to the very essential what they got to do, and that's to have a land base? And it's pretty much come down to a situation. It's all going to depend on what your last name is anymore. And that's unfortunate. You know, 150, 200 years ago, we left a system of that kind of hierarchy from the European countries and came here to this country where land was essentially free. But now with $14,000, $15,000, $20,000 an acre land, you know, Bob, going back to a more honest answer to your question, the fact that I was able to build up our land base when land was still going for less than $1,000 an acre made a huge difference as to how I'm surviving today yet. So, well, more questions or comments? Well, we're not quite done yet, but I'd like to share with you, if I could find it here. a mission statement. It's, a mission statement should be done in 2 or 3 sentences in less than a paragraph. But, bear with me here, okay? So, Johnson Farms strives to provide an adequate financial return to its family members while at the same time seeking to take proper care of the land and the life that grows upon it. Care is given to produce crops that are clean and wholesome in quality. Livestock are reared in such a way that they receive the best in care and nutrition. Family members and those who work on the farm experience and learn the virtues of hard work, trust, patience, and caregiving. The relationship between the farm family and the land is one that is to be nurtured and cultivated. Personal growth, education, and the development of strong values are all lifelong tools that are to be forged as a result of living and working on the farm. Landlords, lending institutions, vendors, and others who provide inputs and capital are to be rewarded and provided a just and fair return for their investments and services. Beyond the care of the land, members of Johnson Farms also seek to cultivate the necessary changes in social, political, and economic policies to nurture a stronger family farm system in agriculture. It is the aspiration of many individuals, including those in the Johnson family, that society return more people to farming. That's probably the most important sentence, at least to me. Success is to be measured more than just in terms of bushels and pounds, but also in human terms of personal well-being. And I have extra copies here, so if anybody wants to take one today, they sure can. So. More questions? I think we got 10, 15 minutes for here. So, I deliberately didn't put together a PowerPoint or whatnot. We do have a farm tour that we hold in late July of every year. And so, I think some of you probably have been to our farm before, but you're certainly welcome to be part of that farm tour in 2025. Or you can visit anytime. I'm open to a phone call or a car pulling up or a pickup pulling up at any point and show you that. And we'll show you the mistakes along with the good stuff too. Thank you.
You're welcome.